ليست ميتة واحدة معي أبو الحيات. ليست ميتة واحدة تقول الضحية للضحية. قتلوني على طرف الطريق، مر قرب الجيران والعائلة ولم يقف أحدا. أكلت الكلاب ذراعي أولا، ثم التهمت قطة جائعة أذني. البقية لم يسجله الوقت، لكنهم سلخوا جلدي كاملا. تقول ضحية أخرى: كان جلدي أبيضا صافيا لم تحرقه الشمس بعد، كان جلدي نادرا. هكذا قالوا وهم يحاولون سلخ مقطع طويل لا نتوء فيه. وثقت قتلي بنفسي، يقول المصور الشاب. جسدي صار فتاتا، لم يجدوا أي قطعة كبيرة قابلة للسلخ، لكنهم وجدوا صورتي كاملة، صوتي المشحون. لم أكن أعرف أنني سأموت، كنت متأكدا أنني سأنجو لأنهم ينظرون. لكنني كنت أعرف، تقول الضحية النحيلة التي يفوح منها رائحة حليب ناشف. وضعت جسدي كله فوق الجنين، كنا نخاف عليه من مرور الذباب، نحيطه بالوسائد ليلا كي لا تضغطه أجسادنا بالخطأ. لكنني وضعت كامل ثقلي فوقه جثة ونجا. مت جوعا، مت لأنهم أوقفوا الأكسجين في الأجهزة. لم أكن قد تعلمت الكلام بعد، لكنني كنت أعرف البكاء. بكيت بكيت حتى انتهى. مت من ضربة شمس، تقول الفتاة بخجل المراهقين. الحر في الطرقات الطويلة يقتل أيضا. مت من الانتظار، لم أغسل كلاي منذ بداية الحرب. قتلت في طابور الخبز، لازالت العائلة جائعة. مت بلا دواء، مت بلا عزاء، مت بلا وداع، مت بلا نداء، مت دون يد، مت دون قلب. مت لأنهم كلهم ماتوا. ليست ميتة واحدة، تقول الضحية للضجر. ليست ميتة واحدة، تقول الضحية للخبر.
Hello everyone, this is Ibrahim Fawzy, an Arabic to English literary translator, and I'll be reading my translation of my Abu Al-Hayat's Not Just One Death, ليست ميتة واحدة. Not just one death. One victim tells another. They killed me by the roadside. Family and neighbors passed by, but none stopped. First, dogs ate my arms. Then, a hungry cat devoured my ears. Time didn't record the rest. My skin was bright, says another victim, untouched by the sun. Smooth and rare, they said, as they tried to peel a long strip of it, with no blemishes. I shot my own death, the young photographer says. My body in shreds. They couldn't find a single piece big enough to flay. But they found my photograph intact, my voice loaded. I didn't know I'd die. I was sure I'd survive, because they were watching. Oh, but I was certain, says the skeletal victim, the scent of dry breast milk wafting. I placed my whole body over the baby. We feared for him from the darting flies, and battered him with pillows at night, lest our bodies unwittingly crushed him. But then, my full weight, a corpse, piled onto him, and he survived. I starved to death. I died because they switched off the vents. I hadn't yet learned to speak, but I knew how to cry. I cried until I was over. I died of sunstroke, says the girl with teen shyness. The burning heat of a long route can kill too. I died of waiting with no dialysis since the war began. I died queuing for bread. The family is still hungry. I died without medication, without consolation, without a farewell, without a harm, without a hand, heartless. I died because they all died, not just one death. The victim says to weariness, not just one death. The victim tells the news. Thank you so much.
كل الطرق تؤدي إلى السماء. اليد التي بترت لا تزال في السماء تائهة عن جسدها، مع أيد وأرجل وآذان أخرى تائهة مثلها. كلما طاقت لصاحبها طلبت من عين أن تبكي لأجلها، كلما أنهكها الطريق طلبت من قدم أن تسير لأجلها، وعندما اقتربت من مكانه طلبت من الأذن أن تتبع صوته، وجدته. أرادت أن تصرخ عاليا وتنادي عليه، فلم تجد فمن ينادي لأجلها. بقيت اليد الخرساء تسمع نداء صاحبها كل يوم: أريد يدي يا الله، أريد يدي، ولا تعرف كيف تنادي: أريد صاحبي يا الله، أريد صاحبي.
All Roads Lead to the Sky by Batool Abu Akleen, translated by Wiam El-Tamami. The hand that has been severed is still up in the sky with other missing hands and feet and ears, all as lost as she is. When she finds herself longing for the person she once belonged to, she asks a lost eye to cry for her. When exhausted by the road, she asks a foot to walk for her. As she draws closer to the place where he was, she asks an ear to trace the sound of his voice until she finds him. She wants to yell out, to scream, to call for him, but she cannot find a mouth to call him with. Every day, the mute hand hears the call of the person she once belonged to. I want my hand back, oh Lord, I want my hand. And she has no way of calling out. I want the person I once belonged to. I want my person back.
This is Scenes from Behind the Siege by Muhammed al-Zaqzouq, and I'm Elisabeth Jaquette. I'll be reading my translation of it, which is forthcoming in the Massachusetts Review. Scenes from Behind the Siege. The bookseller's table at the Displaced Persons Market. In Al-Mawasi, Khan Yunis, the road runs along the sea. Tens of thousands of displaced persons fill the tents lining either side of the road, and I trudged there through a huge crowd of people walking and riding in trucks. This is Rashid Street, or the Sea Road, as it's called by those in the Gaza Strip. The long, congested road has felt much like a city center, ever since Israeli military vehicles destroyed the city of Khan Yunis nearly all the way to El-Mawasi, which lies on the western edge of the city, near the coast. Residents of Khan Yunis, as well as residents of other areas north of Wadi Gaza who have been displaced to Khan Yunis, have all gathered here in El-Mawasi. Just observing people on the road, their pale faces, emaciated bodies, and eyes yellow from hepatitis, is enough to make a person feel distraught. Tired people on a narrow road. The street is filled with trucks and horse and donkey-pulled carts, and on either side are vendors with smaller carts, not leaving much space for people to walk. I passed through this grim and suffocating scene, aimlessly scanning carts where people had set up to sell things. Some were selling canned goods distributed by international relief agencies, cans of beans, peas, sardines, and tuna, along with boxes of all different sizes, shapes, and contents, neatly stacked in dizzying towers. Other carts sold stolen items, cylinders of gas for cooking, rechargeable batteries, solar panels, kitchen utensils, pots and pans, all taken from people's homes after they left. There were carts selling falafel fried over a wood fire, carts selling drinking water, and carts selling stolen clothing, and I walked through it all with the slow, meaningless pace of the dead, my gaze wandering over vendors until it landed on a table with books. The sight transformed my grief-stricken eyes, jolting me awake as if I'd been hit with a current of electricity. The image of books are neatly arranged, side by side atop a clean tablecloth, on a table more elegant than the slapdash ones made from wooden pallets next to it, stirred in me a wave of contradictory emotions. I felt a sense of nostalgia and longing for my bookshelves back home, which had resisted attempts to be used as kindling. When the war began and our cooking gas was cut off, people resorted to cooking over fires of paper and cardboard they found in the street. I nearly succumbed to burning books to satisfy the children's hunger, and I would have, were it not for the shopkeeper below our apartment, who gave me a bundle of cardboard to use as fuel in the clay oven, allowing my books to remain on their shelves, all of them, untouched. Untouched until the military invaded Khan Yunis, and I had to leave my home and was displaced to Rafah. Seeing these books on a table stirred in me a longing for my own bookshelves, as well as a degree of sadness. They had likely been stolen from public libraries or from people's homes. I couldn't imagine my own bookshelves being looted, especially after I'd struggled, physically and psychologically, not to burn them. I was also surprised. Who cared about books now, amid such carnage, destroying everything in its path? Who would spend money on books when people were starving, poor, and in need? I felt confused by the sight of a table selling books in a place otherwise subsumed by such tragedy and pain. News from the city, courtesy of a book cart. After reflecting on the scene and my accompanying emotions, I stood and examined the books arranged on the table, titles sleeping side by side amid a war of annihilation. Meanwhile, people walked by with vacant eyes, hearts consumed with sadness, and despondent faces draped in misery. Most of the titles were familiar to me, books I'd read in a library or even had on my own bookshelf, from days far past when I would travel long distances to get my hands on a book. Mother by Maxime Gorky, Blindness by José Saramago, Homage to Catalonia by George Orwell, The Days by Taha Hussein, a set of religious books, including those about Sufism, the treatise of al-Qushairi, and a poetry collection and a collection of poetry by Ibn al-Farid. I continued browsing at a typical leisurely pace. The books could have been sitting in a public library or bookstore, and they might even have been taken from one, until my eyes fell on a title called Noon, Poems in the Cobbler's Cart, by my friend Nidal al-Faqawi. At first, I was pleased to find Nidal's collection of poetry among the books on the table. I loved his poems. They had been part of my life for a long time, and I'd returned to them often over the years. But then I realized the book could have been taken from my bookshelf, and that would mean that my apartment had been robbed. Israeli tanks had already entered the entire city of Khan Yunis, and we were following news of the Israeli advance into neighborhoods across the city. One could tell how far the tanks had come, not just by the sound of explosions and columns of smoke that we could see as we were displaced into al-Mawasi, but also by the volume of stolen goods that appeared for sale here on the sea road. If this book really had been taken from my bookshelves, I said to myself, it would mean that tanks had reached my neighborhood, that the army had entered my apartment, and that thieves had come after them. The only way to tell whether this copy of the book had been taken from my bookshelves was to open to the first page and to see whether there was a dedication. My copy held a dedication to me, written by Nidal in his own handwriting. I crouched down and moved closer. Out of the corner of his eye, the owner of the table watched me open the book and read the following. To my friend, Hossam Shaheta. I sighed in relief and smiled, reassured that the book hadn't been taken from my bookshelf. My house hadn't been looted. The army might not even have entered it. And at the same time, I thought to myself, someone should tell Hossam that his house has been looted. Does anyone read in times of war? I looked up and turned my gaze in relative relief to the young man who owned the table. He was still looking at me, his gaze tinged with suspicion and evident inquiry. I told myself that the best defense is a good offense. I'll take him by surprise and question him before he starts questioning me. I had noticed the questions in his eyes and on his lips, a torrent about to be unleashed. Where did you get these books? I asked. I expected him to be surprised or even confused by the question, but he replied quite calmly. Some of them are my own, and others I bought from thieves who found them in wooden cabinets they'd stolen from people's homes. They were going to burn the books as fuel for clay ovens, but I bought them for next to nothing. Does anyone care about buying books these days? I asked. Every day plenty of people stop by, believe me, he said. Some people buy books. I sell them for list price, and people buy them for as much, while others are content to browse and move on to the next cart. But some of these books are stolen. What if the owner of a book comes to buy it? And what if they do? Plenty of people come across things in the market that were stolen from their own homes, and they buy them back. We both smiled. I left him and continued on my way. The man's brief, clear, and honest answers were a window into how people try to protect themselves from the beast of war, a beast which, with unparalleled brutality, ravages the souls of people enduring the incredible horror and pain of war. War is like a giant machine with many gears, like the machines in massive factories where piles of scrap metal are melted down. This is what war does in people's souls. It melts down the details of daily suffering, the fear, the loss, the endless waiting and dehumanizing lines of displaced people. And to the backdrop of this escalating, inhumane loss, which displaced people are subjected to every day, you can understand what they hope to do by buying and reading books. Books offer an opportunity to engage in a human act, one that defies the inhumane war machine. Reading, as such, is an act of resistance against brutality, brutality amplified by multiplying images, brutality evident in the hostile tenor of life. This is the experience of displaced persons in this narrow section of land bordered by the coastline from Rafah in the south to Nusayrat in the middle of the Gaza Strip, where people are crammed together and subjected to all manner of pain and torment. In order to protect yourself from the unfathomable difficulty of life in this furnace, you must take refuge in something that maintains your identity as a human being, as someone who is aware, who has agency, and who is capable of engaging with the pain around them without turning to stone. This is what books can do. Reading is an act that confronts brutality and preserves one's humanity, keeping it from being ground down by the millstones of war, which pulverize everything in sight. The very worst thing war does is destroy one's ability to feel empathy and pain, sentiments that a human being faced with annihilation deserves to feel and experience. Thank you.
Obit, Baba. My father died after they bombed midnight in Rafah. His right arm was all I had left. I carried it as if it had lived a good life. It never spoke, but gestured. The body is a difficult language. Its words would have never survived the coffin. He once told me, if your language is stolen, another one will emerge on your tongue. At night, I hold his arm so I don't wake up and remember everything. Obit, Ummi. My mother died after they strangled Rafah. The day before, she told me waiting is a hard wound to tend to. Then she said she was sorry. Later, I realized she knew she was going to be killed, knew these were her last words to me. She was taken the way memory is after an explosion. You try to remember, but can't.
غريب في بلدي. أمشي في شارع حينا الجديد وينظر الحي إلي كوجه مألوف، متأكد أننا انتقلنا إلى هذا البيت حديثا. ما بالي يحفظ وجوه الناس ويحفظونني. لم يخبرنا مهندس بيتنا أن الثيم الرمادي هو رماد حقا، ولا حب أمي للشمس يعني أن مطبخنا سيكون بلا حائط. لم تطهو لنا أمي وجبة منذ أكتوبر، فكل الأيام كانت ليل. ليس عليك أن تفتح شباك غرفتك لترى المشهد، فكل شبابيك العالم مفتوحة الآن، وأنت المشهد.
Stranger in my country. I traipse the streets of our new neighborhood as the neighborhood watches me, a familiar face, so sure we've just moved to this house. I find myself memorizing people's faces. I memorize my own. The architect never told us the powder grey theme would consist of ashes. He didn't say, either, that my mother's love for sunlight would bring us a kitchen without walls. She hasn't cooked a single breakfast since October, as all our days have become one long night. There's no need to open your bedroom window to watch the scene. All the world's windows are open now, and you are the scene.